7:12 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon,
Present.
Mr. Allens,
Here.
Mr. Scrivano,
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch, Mr. Siegel,
Here.
Mr. Connor,
Here.
Ms. Stanford. Here. With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Derek from IT, who's filling in for Connor tonight, behind the scenes producing our board broadcasts on Channel 20 and Zoom and YouTube Live. So thank you, Derek, for filling in. We appreciate your help. So we are now at the petitions and communications portion of our meeting, when we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communication portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comment portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to the comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meeting in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. Not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators, or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. 2 names will be called at once. The one whose turn it is to speak, and I think we just have 1 in-person speaker and 6 who are remote speakers. So I will call your name. We have a clock on the wall to help you with your timing for 2 minutes, and we thank you for your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. So our first speaker tonight is Mel Gillivan. And Kevin Ryan, you will be next.
Hi, I'm Mel Gillivan. I'm the president of the Rockford Education Association. I'm here tonight with my friend Chad Anderson, the vice president of the Rockford Education Association. Basically, I'm here tonight to report back to you from our membership. We did share our survey with you guys that we gave several weeks ago that outlined a great number. Over 70% of our teachers were unsure about a return to school. You guys recently shared your survey data, which also I found quite interesting. 53% of the parents in Rockford have also had similar feelings to our teachers about a remote, taking that remote option as the safest way back into the classroom. Great conversation with the superintendent today about our comparable districts. We use a lot of comparable districts, and you guys all know about the LUDA districts, which are the large unit districts similar to ourselves. I'd asked the superintendent because I had been fishing around, and we had a very nice, honest conversation. Most of those districts that are comparable to us have decided to flip and go to a remote learning option. And I'm here tonight to ask the board to consider that. Not here with demands. I've been at the table working with all these administrators in this room for a long time. What we're asking is for the board to be reasonable and consider a remote return to the classroom. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin Ryan is next, to be followed by Colleen Blaney. Kevin Ryan here. All right, we'll move to Colleen Blaney, to be followed by Matt Hota. Colleen?
Hello.
Hi, you can go
Hi.
ahead now.
Thank you for your time and thank you for your concern for Education Board. I'm concerned myself about a couple of health issues that I have learned about concerning COVID, and one would be the long-term effects for people who get COVID. They're talking about some respiratory and heart problems that are long-term, according to the Mayo Clinic. Also, I think we've all kind of looked at the news and see that there's a new multi-inflammatory syndrome that's a branch from COVID that affects young people. It's infants to 20-year-olds, and so far the people who have reported to have it are 40% Latino or Hispanic, 33% Black, and 13% white. And so I'm concerned about the kids and the adults, and I just ask that you consider remote learning. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Colleen. Matt Hotok to be followed by Stephanie Valderrama. Matt, are you there?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Okay, yes.
Hi. So I've been a Spanish teacher at Jefferson for the past 15 years. I'm married and I have two boys, age 3 and 9. I wanted to give you guys an urgent plea to focus on safety and compliance. As you're aware, COVID cases in Illinois have been increasing to a point we haven't seen since May. As mentioned earlier, larger districts that are similar, like U46 and CPS, have decided to go remote, and I'm wondering why we're not. And as was mentioned earlier also, a survey that was done by the union where 70% of staff said that we do not feel safe returning. According to the CDC, African Americans and Latinx have a positivity rate of 16% when combined, while white is only at 4%. This can have a big impact in our community, which is 60% African American and Latinx. Schools currently have policies for such things as dress codes, cell phones. Teachers and administrators must constantly be on the lookout for these infractions of these policies. When you begin to add new policies, such as wearing a mask and cleaning your desk before you leave, it becomes difficult to enforce compliance without being overloaded. We're wondering what discipline will look like with these new infractions. For instance, if a teacher didn't notice something that was taking place in their room, that could have a big impact negatively. Knowing it's up to parents to conduct proper temperature and symptom screenings, we're wondering how this will be done to full compliance when we don't have documentation. Other nearby districts like Winnebago will be conducting temperature and symptom checks to every student before they enter the building. I'm a teacher. I know what happens in my building. I'm scared for my sons and myself and my family and my students. So please consider all these factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Stephanie Valderrama to be followed by Melissa Miramontes. Stephanie, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, hi, I'm Stephanie. I also teach world languages. I'm at Risa Middle School. And I want to agree with everything that my colleague Matt just said about the compliance issues. I was also going to talk about that, but I'm going to shift over to something that's been brought up a lot, which is the social and emotional support of our students. We know that as teachers, we know that our students need social and emotional support. Dr. Jarrett comes every year and asks us at our schools, what can we do better? And that is always a theme. We need more social workers. We need more counselors. We need smaller class sizes so that we can meet those needs. And it's the status quo every year. I don't feel like we're focusing on that until now. We're in the middle of this pandemic and suddenly we're being told, well, we prioritize safety, but we also need to think about social and emotional supports. And it honestly, it feels like gaslighting. It feels like we've been talking about that for years and had very little attention on that. And suddenly that is the central tenet why we have to be back. And it is hurtful. And I personally, I'm just gonna speak for myself here. I feel that I haven't been heard on that in years prior. And now that's being put into my face. Like, hey, you need to prioritize your safety second. But in the plan that was laid out, safety is mentioned as first. That is the first thing that the district says they're prioritizing is our safety and the safety of the students. And I don't feel it's safe to go into the buildings And I do feel that you're asking us, because we love our students, to put our safety second. And I emailed all of you about Maslow's hierarchy. Safety is number one, and then we get to connection. And I do believe that we have amazing teachers who can connect remotely with these students and form relationships and form routines. And so I'm here asking you to consider remote learning at this time until it is safe to go back into the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Melissa Miramontes, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Melissa Miramontes and I'm a teacher at Jefferson. I want to stress my concern in regards to in-person instruction. I have a very unique case because I'll be 7 months pregnant on September 2nd, and I'm terrified for the safety of me and my unborn child. There's been complications in pregnancies, including one case right here in Rockford. A nurse tested positive for COVID-19 at 7 months pregnant, and a week later she had an emergency C-section. She then spent more than 40 days in the ICU and has only held her son once. Obviously, I'm not a nurse, but I feel like going back to school would put me at risk, especially since we don't have the same, we're not as well equipped as nurses. I don't want to risk it, and I would hope that you guys would understand that. I did receive a doctor's note stating that if I contract COVID, I'm at greater risk of complications. But since there's no more remote positions being offered for secondary teachers, from my understanding, then it feels like you guys are disregarding my health issues and the health issues of many others. If one teacher, student, or unborn child dies, how will you feel knowing this could have been prevented? Teachers can teach remotely and eliminate the risk of getting COVID at school. I would love to go back to school to teach in person, but I want my students, coworkers, and my unborn child to be safe. This is my first priority, as I would think it'd be yours as well. Also, with eliminating the remote positions for secondary, the AB days are going to be eliminated. Last year, Jefferson had 1,700 students. If half of them want in-person instruction, that's around 850 students in a building at one time. This is not safe. The U.S. News reports 97,000 kids infected with COVID in the last 2 weeks of July. How can you expect teachers to go into a building with that many students when some board members won't even physically attend a meeting last week with 10 people? And when some downtown people are working from home, but yet you expect teachers with high risk, like myself and many others, to go into the building with 100 people. I understand children need school, I really do, but more importantly, children need to be safe. If we can increase the chances of children being safe, why would we decide on any other option?
Thank you, Melissa, for your time. And next is Joanne Randall. Are you there? Joanne Randall?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Joanne Randall. I've taught in the Rockford School District for over 20 years. As a teacher, many of my decisions are data-driven. Some recent data I came across was a report from the American Pediatric Academy. It stated that between March 1st through July 30th, 338,982 United States children have tested positive for the coronavirus. 1/4 of that number, more than 97,000, occurred in the last 2 weeks of July. 1/4 of the total occurred in the last 2 weeks. That data suggests the number of cases positive for COVID-19 in children is rapidly increasing. That data tells me that the more that children are let out of the house and interact with others exposed to the virus, they become infected just like everybody else. As an educator, I believe in facts. According to the CDC.gov, there are more COVID-19 cases, more hospitalizations, and more deaths within racial and ethnic minorities. On June 10th, Dr. Jarrett, our superintendent, wrote a personal statement on institutional racism. I was truly inspired. He promised to set up committees, and even as a white man not exposed to firsthand discrimination, vowed to bridge the gap between majority and minority students. Dr. Jarrett, sir, I'm asking you to begin with aiding the safety of these minority students and the safety of their families. Right now, remote learning is our safest option. In theory, it seems like RPS has a safe plan, but we know in practice it's not safe. Hallways are too crowded. Classrooms are lucky to have 3 feet social distancing. Buses 2 to a seat. Masks are difficult to monitor students wearing, no less wearing correctly. Please put them over your nose. Students returning to school after a 2-week quarantine with no tests proving they're still not contagious. Finally, as a Mima to 10 beautiful grandchildren, I ask the board, I plead with the board, go to remote learning. Many other districts are realizing in-person learning is too risky.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, I just want to double check to see if Kevin Ryan is there. No. Okay. Thank you all for your cooperation and your interest in following our guidelines. Thank you. I'll open it up to board member comments at this time. Mr. Siegel, do you have your light on? I can't tell. No. Okay. All right. No. That's right. Mr. Khan, go ahead.
Yeah. One of the speakers said something, I'd like administration, we usually don't respond, but I heard that there are no remote positions available, and I believe they said secondary, but could somebody from administration state how many open positions are there right now for remote, and how many have applied?
Does that occur?
Right now at the elementary level, we have posted right around 120 remote positions at the general education classroom level. There are several others posted for bilingual and ESL as well, and I know more special ed is to come. At the secondary level, we'll be talking tonight about an adjusted plan where if there are medical accommodations at the secondary level with the new plan, we will be working with those individuals through the ADA interactive process to look at how we can offer a remote option for those teachers as well. So that is on the table, and we'll be working with those teachers individually for those medical reasons.
The fine answer, my question was different though. What are the actual numbers of available remote learning teaching positions, and how many teachers have applied for those?
For the elementary jobs that have been advertised, which is again about 120, just maybe slightly over, we had about 20 applicants.
And secondary?
We don't have any secondaries posted because of the way we'll organize our remote positions. It'll be through medical accommodation because of the plan of working with your in-person and remote students.
Would it be fair to say that there will be openings in the secondary level for remote positions?
Yeah, it would be all based on accommodations and whether we can make those, but I would say that there's definitely possibilities for medical accommodations to be worked with and to potentially be met.
Mr. Rollins.
So first off, I just want to thank the hundreds and hundreds of teachers across this district who have been working this summer to get ready to go back to school, regardless of how they think they're going to do it. I do want to talk a little bit about the survey results, because I think the way they were characterized is a little misleading. I know somebody who took that survey because I live with them. So the survey results that are being discussed were a question of whether or not people felt somewhat uncomfortable or very uncomfortable going back to school. And the 70% figure was 70% of the respondents. We have about 2,000 teachers, 1,300 responded. I think it's reasonable to assume that the people who were the most concerned responded. And of that, so out of 2,000 teachers, about 27% said they were very uncomfortable returning. There was another percentage that said they were somewhat uncomfortable. We're all uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable sitting here in a mask. Everybody's going to be uncomfortable. But what they didn't ask, what teachers were never asked, was, do you think we should go back to school? Do you want to go back to school? That was not a question that was on the survey. I'm guessing, I don't really know, I'm guessing that my wife said she was somewhat uncomfortable. She probably is somewhat uncomfortable. She also wrote in her comments, I think we need to get back to school. I think kids need to be in school to learn. I would like to hear an educator stand in front of us and tell us to our face that they think remote learning is as effective as in-person learning. We are all here because we have a priority on education. We prioritize education. We think education is important. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that's important. Safety is certainly important, but it is important, and we need to talk about it. I've been thinking a lot about some words lately that are not my words, but I want to read them. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and of vigor has met with that understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory. And I am convinced that you will again give that support to leadership in these critical days. Those were Franklin Delano Roosevelt's words in his first inaugural address in the depths of the Great Depression. What was he talking about? Did FDR really think that there was nothing to fear but fear itself? Millions of people were unemployed in a time when being unemployed meant you starved. Children were starving, adults were starving, and yet he said that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Was he stupid? Did he not care about the people that were starving? I don't think either of those. I think he was making a point. I think he was making a point that we can become paralyzed by fear, and that in doing so, we cannot advance. And I am a little bit concerned that that's the point at which we are in this country. And I think that's because we have a huge leadership vacuum at all levels of government in this country. But I also think that, say FDR said those words today, in the current environment, suppose he gave that address today, he would be cut in 1,000 pieces by social media. I don't know that we can have leadership like that anymore because of social media. We've been told consistently throughout this crisis that we should be listening to the experts. We are listening to the experts. We are listening to our state level experts, our national experts, but most importantly, our local experts. Our local health experts, Winnebago County Health Department, feel that based on the numbers that we have today and the trends that they're seeing today, that opening schools is the right thing to do. They know that, they say that, because they're taking all factors into account. They're taking into account what they think is going to happen to children who don't go to school. They're taking into account what they think will happen to children and adults who do go to school. They're taking into account what they think will happen, whether they think that the virus will be transmitted in the community. They're taking all of that into account. So having since mid-March, February, been told over and over again to listen to the experts, why are we being told something different now? That's what I'd like to know.
Mr. Siegel? Hate having to follow up FDR. It's not a secret to Mr. Rollins that he and I have different perspectives on the return to school, but we share a common view on how fear is playing on our decision making. Teachers took a survey some time back. Parents took a survey much more recently. We have given our best input at a time that's extremely challenging and filled with anxiety. I'm guessing by the looks of y'all, this is your first pandemic of this magnitude. It's mine. And making basic decisions, I think, is kind of become understood as being really difficult. I mean, it's become the cliche that I'm not sure what I'm going to make for dinner tonight, but it would be a peanut butter sandwich or peanut butter crackers. Things are difficult. Every decision is challenging, and we're being asked to make really, really difficult decisions. There is no question that whatever decision gets made about the return to school, that there are going to be dire risks for our students and for our teachers and for our staff. We had a speaker mention that nearly 400,000 students in our nation, or children in our nation, tested positive for COVID, most of them in the last couple of weeks, when they've not been in school. It's not a secret that kids are getting COVID. It's not a secret adults are getting COVID. Teachers are getting COVID. And they're not in school. It's ridiculous to think that the only safe option is for an all remote return to school. And to suggest that if we have face-to-face instruction and someone gets sick or God forbid dies, that this hangs on our head any more than by going all remote and a student dies, that doesn't hang on our heads. Again, we are in a pandemic of a magnitude none of us has ever seen. We don't have a clear-cut blueprint as to the way to go forward, all safe, all secure. We don't. What we do know is that we have an administration in cooperation with teachers, the health department, asking lots of questions, doing tons of research, doing tons of actual application to figure out how to make the infrastructure that they have work for the greatest number of students, for the greatest number of teachers. I was just recently told that I shouldn't judge the typical by the extreme. I have a habit of doing that. I've been getting a lot of messages about the optics of a school board that won't meet face-to-face, but we're expecting the students to. We had one meeting in July while we were, as I recall, under phase 3 or stage 3, whatever it's called, where we were not permitted to meet face-to-face. We had a meeting last week, and the bulk of us were here. A greater percentage of us were here than for students who are returning to school. To judge the decisions that we are making through the optics of that particular lens, I think is extreme. I see we're all here tonight. We're all appropriately masked up. I think we're all appropriately prepared to speak and defend our own positions on the plan going forward. I think this administration is prepared. I think the board is prepared. And I think we need to look at these next 3 weeks before we open as an opportunity to make really educated choices about what truly is going to be the best way to meet the needs of the greatest number of students. Have that on our minds. I don't 100% agree with what I think is probably the majority of the board on how to go forward. However, this is my first pandemic. I can't say my plan's better than anybody else's, and I can tell you that the plan that has been presented is very defensible and very workable. And I'm hoping that in the next 3 weeks, we can all just put our heads together and focus on making our best plan and making that plan work.
Thank you. The other board members.
Yep, I have one agenda question.
Sure.
Is agenda item 3B, is the purpose of that, it's a back to school plan for us to enumerate around our thoughts for going back to school? I mean, Or are we going to do that right now in the board comments?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, Mike. 11?
11B. So 11B, which is the back to school plan, is where we're going to go through this.
My understanding
Topic.
is that that's a presentation by administration on the status of the current plan. It's
Right.
for informational purposes.
So, so my point would be that the questions and comments about the going back to school are under 11B. That's where we're.
Yeah, I mean, you can give comments whenever you want. We're in board comments, right?
Yeah, I would say board comments would be the time if you want to make a statement about your position.
Well, and I mean, so what
There are two topics on tonight's agenda that are related. One is in the consent agenda, 7A, the modified academic calendar that Mr. Zedeker is going to be presenting.
Yeah.
And 11B, I've asked Mrs. Detman to present additional details to the board about how instruction might look, particularly at the secondary level, but also with the proposal regarding Wednesdays. So there'll be two opportunities to have further Q&A and discussion.
Okay, so that's okay. That was my point. Is
All
that
right.
those would be the places for us
Okay,
to
understand.
enumerate. Okay, thank you.
Ms. McCullough, do you have your light on down there?
I do.
Okay.
So I'm one of the people who wasn't here at the meeting last week. The other two were on vacation, so if they would have been here, I'm absolutely certain. And I don't want to be personal, but I'm going to be. My husband has no kidneys and is on a list for a transplant, which is important for me to stay as healthy as I can so that we can get to that point. We've been waiting 5 years for this moment, and it's finally come. But I'm here. And I'm here to show you that doing the three things that the rest of the world is doing better than the United States can keep us safe. I have my mask. I also have a shield. The rest of you don't, but that's my extra precaution. Hand washing, meticulously hand washing. We have hand sanitizers here, but that's not enough. Hand washing, social distancing. You guys are, and I was actually, if the room was full, I considered being in another room and zooming in just to maintain that distance. But I feel like the district is doing what they need to do to help us to follow the guidelines that were given. One of the board members said earlier, and not on the floor, but when we were enclosed, that we aren't the experts. We're not the health experts. And we're relying on the health experts, not just locally, as Mr. Allen said, but nationally, even internationally, as to what to do to be safe, because this isn't going to go away just in 3 months. We're going to have to develop the habits that keep us safe and continue those probably for another, 18 months, who knows? I think one of the ways that our students can learn how best to model those habits is to be in school, to be washing their hands, to be distant, to be careful with interactions. And I think that we can do it. I said to the board members earlier, they said we couldn't control cell phones. And somehow last year, our schools really cracked down on cell phone usage and were very successful in getting students focused on learning in the classroom and not having their cell phones out. They said it couldn't be done. People are saying you can't get kids to wear masks. I find that children are the best mask wearers compared to adults because they're told to do it and they do it. Now, middle school and high school, it'll be a challenge. But there is a consequence if you don't follow the rules, if you don't keep your distance, if you don't wash your hands, and I understand we can't tell that all those older kids are washing their hands, but if you're not wearing your mask and correctly over your nose, thank you for the speaker who mentioned that, then they're not going to be in school. We're going to put them remote because they're endangering the health of everybody else in the area. There's no perfect plan. I think it's been thought out. I think that execution is going to be the bane of our existence, because we've had problems with execution before in other areas, but this one is way more important. And I just really believe my daughter is a public health, has international public health, and she has been honest from day one, way before we even all went into our lockdowns and quarantines, about how to deal with this situation. And I think it can be done. And I think it's our job, again, as a district, that's part of what we're teaching students, how we're all going to survive this. And just like in the the rest of the world, we're a microcosm of the rest of the world. And yes, there will be COVID. We'll have students and probably teachers, and we'll have to deal with it. But when we do, again, we're not the experts. It will be the health department that assists us in the decisions that have to be made, or not just assist us, tell us you can't have school anymore. But our students deserve a chance. I think 50%, 49% of our parents want their students in school. Are we going to ignore their requests? As Mr. Connor said, we have at the elementary level, and Mr. Zediger said 120, but with specialists and bilingual and all the other, it's closer to 170, and we had 20 people apply. Where are all the teachers who are concerned at the elementary school if they're not out there applying for these remote positions? They're there. There is an opportunity for them not to be in a classroom interacting with students and being in a space doing remote teaching. Having changed the secondary to the AB day, A being in person, B being remote, makes it much more difficult. And I understand our speaker who is pregnant and concerned. She has her doctor's note where, we're going to work with people who have medical conditions that put them at risk. Mrs. Detman's going to talk about that later, about how we can have secondary teachers who are remote with a person in person in their classroom. So it's not that we haven't advertised it because we don't have we don't have specific positions, but if you are in a position and you have a class that you need to teach and you can't be physically there, then we're going to work with you to make that work and within for your safety. So, if I'm not here over the next couple weeks because my husband got his transplant, he's on his immunosuppressants and he's at super risk and we're sitting up in a hospital, please don't think it's because I'm fearful of being around the district and the COVID and everything, but we do all have our own personal stories and our personal journeys. And as the district has said, they are going to try to accommodate and work with those the best they can. And we all have to work to overcome our fear. And I don't know, other than moving forward, how else we're going to be able to do that. It's what amazes me are the number of people who, we can't do this, that, and the other, and they're sitting in restaurants with their masks off, eating. I don't care that you're 6 feet apart from the next table. You've got, the server there. The dells are full of people. People are traveling all over the place. I see people, pictures of crowds at the beaches not far from us, Lake Geneva, other areas. And I think if we as a nation would just take some responsibility, we could be where the rest of the world is. We could be at a 3% positivity rate. But we're not going to get there if it's all about I. It has to be the we. And we as a board would like to be able to show that we can conduct classes and we can meet the needs of our students and families who want class and meet the needs of those who want it to be remote while respecting the needs of our teachers as we're able.
I'll just add a comment on my own. It's real short. Is that what I like about our plan, and I can't tell you how much work has gone into this plan from the administrators and from our teachers to do what I would call a choice, and I'm respectful of what decisions parents want to make about their own kids. If they think it's the safest to do remote, or if they want their kids in school, that's their choice. That's what I like about our plan. The same goes for the teachers and our staff. If they want to do remote, they can apply for those positions and teach remotely, if particularly, you know, to the young lady who is 7 months pregnant or whatever, that we can hopefully accommodate that person and make sure that she's in a safe environment. So I like the fact that the plan has choice. So, any other comments? Okay. We'll move on then to the consent items, including the following: the meeting minutes of July 14th, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, contracts under 10,000. The other consent items, including the modified academic calendar for 2021, the workers' compensation settlement agreement, the resolution authorizing and directing preparation of the tentative 21-22 fiscal year budget, the monthly cash and investment report for June of 2020, and the Freedom of Information Law. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the consent items.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scavano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough.
Yes.
Mr. Siegel.
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now on to the closed session consent agenda items, including the HR organizational report and addendum, and the student discipline consent items for unless otherwise modified below. The board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Students 4371 and 4372 are expelled for the entire 2021 school year, and the following students are receiving EIAs. They are students 8092, 8157, 8158, 8159, 8160, students 8161, 8162, 8163, 8164, 8165, 8166, 8167, 8168, student 8169, 8170, 8171, 8172, 8173, 8174, 8175, 8176, 8178, 8179, 8180, 8181, 8182, 8183, 8184, 8185, 8186, and student 8187. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any closed session consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scavano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough.
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
I do have two separate items that I'm going to be asking for a presentation under my report tonight. Mrs. Detman is going to do the back to school plan update. I'm also going to have Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Blaylock present our school quality survey results. I do want to just frame the issue a little bit. I have been very vocal that I believe safety, equitable opportunities for achievement, and social emotional support are all key tenets and interests that we need to balance on behalf of our students and our community. I do want to highlight just some of the big items that that are changes that we're attempting to work with our community to improve in all these areas. We're going to be talking a little bit about our Wednesday plan. It was mentioned that there maybe isn't much consideration or seriousness about social emotional support for our students. We've in fact carved an entire day of the week out during the school year in partnership with the REA at the elementary and the secondary level to ensure that the more than $15 million a year that we've invested in new social emotional support positions as well as training is going to be able to be implemented for our neediest students on Wednesdays throughout the school year. Another thing we've talked about is safety. We have made a commitment to work relentlessly to get class sizes below 20. And I think we are going to be able to do that at all levels. And we are really excited about the progress we have made. We had a very even, relatively close to 50-50 parental choice, and that is going to allow class size to be, we believe, below 20 across the board. And we think that allows for social distancing and those configurations. We are going to continue to work with the health department, the state of Illinois, and all their partners to ensure that our daily meetings that are focused on improving frequently asked questions, safety manuals for families are all continually be perfected, and that we have clear standards. When I say we're consulting, we are absolutely ultimately under the framework of our Winnebago County Health Department and Dr. Martell and their leadership, as well as the state of Illinois. Those are the groups that are deciding whether or not the science says it's okay to move forward with any of our plans. I also am excited to say that we are going to be adding an early childhood remote option. That's going to be another chance to add choice to families. We listened and we really made those changes. And finally, this secondary schedule, which can be a little bit difficult to explain, I've asked Mrs. Detman to walk everyone through what that Wednesday schedule for intervention as well as the secondary schedule will look like. So I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Detman to talk a little bit about this back to school plan, and specifically what would a student experience at the secondary level if he or she chooses remote, or if he or she chooses the blended model. And with that, Mrs. Detman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So just to kind of set the stage, I plan to go pretty slowly through this presentation to make sure that I'm clearly explaining the model. It is very different from what we're used to, and so it deserves some pause and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'd like to start by kind of resetting our focus for this presentation. This presentation is about our instructional model grades 6 through 12, because what we had initially planned in the summer is not what our data suggested we needed. And so we needed to pivot. One thing that's been really important to me and my team as we've been doing this work collaboratively with teachers is that there are no winners and losers based on the instructional model that a family's circumstances led them to choose. So whether a family is choosing remote or they're choosing in person, we want them to feel like that was the right decision. It was the right decision for your family and for your child. And so we're doing our work now to ensure we're lining our resources to give the best possible education in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So our focus here is grades 6 through 12, and I'm going to focus on 2 of the 3 components of our plan, mostly academic support and social emotional support, and that's what I'll be focused on in this particular presentation. I'm going to start by level setting with a couple of definitions. First is what is synchronous and what is asynchronous. Synchronous means that students are learning the same content at the same time. It doesn't have to be in the same location, but they are in time together. Asynchronous means that students are learning at different times. They can be learning at their own pace. They can be going back and repeating material that they need. And so students are learning the same kind of material, but they're learning at different times. So synchronous together, asynchronous not together. I'm going to walk through 2 different instructional models because our families had 2 choices. The first is a hybrid instructional model. And this is the choice that parents selected if they wanted in-person instruction. We're only able to offer, because of how large our secondary schools are, 2 days of in-person instruction. That means that the remaining 3 days are remote learning for students who selected this option. Now keep in mind that one of those 3 days will fall on a Wednesday, and starting on slide 13, I'll explain what Wednesdays will look like. Wednesdays will look different than the rest of the days of the week. So 2 days in person, 3 days remote. If you are a visual person, you can follow along with the icons that let you know when we're in person and when we're remote. Here's a week at a glance for students who have selected in-person instruction. On Mondays, Students will attend their school. Of course, all of our safety precautions as outlined in the family handbook and the staff handbook will be followed. Students will attend in their 50-minute class periods. This is school, quote unquote, as usual, you know, kind of as normal as we can be in these circumstances. What will be different is class size, number of students in hallways, and of course, just our health and safety protocols throughout the day. But in these class periods, we would anticipate what we expect for all high quality instruction, which is a meaningful launch to a lesson, ample opportunity for students to collaborate, practice, and demonstrate learning, and then closing a class period with a check for understanding. What will be different this year is in that closing of the class, teachers are also going to make sure that students understand what their next step is on Tuesday, because they won't be together. They'll be learning asynchronously. So that will be added to the routine every Monday and every Thursday for these students who are in person with their teachers. How will they get in touch? How will the teacher be checking in? What kind of feedback can the student expect? How will they be collaborating with their peers and maintaining a sense of community in their class? On Tuesday, then, those students will be prepared to go ahead and engage in remote learning. Now, this will require some responsibility on the student's end to ensure that as they work to achieve a minimum of 5 hours of learning, that they are allocating their time appropriately. And that will require some support at home as well. Remote learning occurs asynchronously. This does not mean that students are simply assigned homework and sent off to complete it. That is not what asynchronous learning means. And I'll go into more detail on that in just a little bit. We'll be asking teachers to plan a maximum of 50 minutes per class period. The maximum would give them slightly more than 5 hours of learning, but we have a minimum of 5 hours and a maximum of 50 minutes per class period of work to be completed on Tuesdays. Students cannot be expected to be on a screen for hours and hours and hours, and they cannot be expected to be completing, you know, the equivalent of 12 hours of learning in a regular school day. So we have to be smart about our guidelines to make sure that we're setting students up for success. On that Wednesday, our in-person or hybrid model students will still be remote learning most likely. Now, some of them may be coming in for some in-person small group interventions. And again, starting on slide 13, I'll walk through the details of that. So that's very possible that some students will run their regular bus route and attend school on Wednesday as well. Again, we have a maximum of 5 hours per learning or per day. On Thursday, those students are coming back in person with their teacher, and they're going to run their regular bell schedule, and we'll kind of, you know, rinse and repeat here on Monday. We're going to be checking in. We're going to be having more launching of new concepts, providing feedback, small group work, regular lessons. On Friday, then those students are prepared by the end of Thursday's classes to know what to expect on Friday. And on Friday, they're doing their asynchronous learning again. So this will be the weekly schedule: Monday, Thursday in person, Tuesday, Friday remote. Wednesdays we'll review in a bit, but 5 days of learning every week, no matter where they are. Asynchronous instruction is probably the bit that's going to be the hardest to wrap our heads around. Both in, you know, just listening to this presentation now and as we start to do this work with students. What we did in the spring was really what we've started terming emergency remote learning, which happened very, very quickly. And I think our teachers did a great job. But it was mostly based on kind of limiting learning gaps and keeping learning going. It wasn't focused on introducing new material and really pushing for that deep learning. That is no longer acceptable moving into the new school year. Now this is truly delivering education differently. So here's what asynchronous instruction can look like. So there are several things, and some of these tools I hope are beginning to sound familiar to you. But there are several ways that students can learn and demonstrate their learning in asynchronous environments. First is through discussion. We want students interacting with their teacher, and we want them interacting with each other, either synchronously or asynchronously on those days. Students can be doing their research and exploration, practicing and reviewing, working on collaborative tasks, being assessed for their learning, doing some personal reflection and metacognition about what's working for them, and where they're most proud of their efforts, and then also reteaching and extending. And you've seen a lot of these digital tools come forward over the last several months. We, of course, have our Google Education Suite, Padlet, Flipgrid, Screencastify, Newsela, Nearpod, OneTab, and Seesaw. All of these are tools that we've been introducing to teachers over the last several months. And we're not going to stop. We'll continually have professional learning available for these tools. We also understand that there's a need to have personal learning available for parents and families so that they can help their children navigate these tools at home as well. On those Mondays and Thursdays, as part of the launch into remote learning, our teachers are going to be teaching students how to use these tools effectively to support their education on asynchronous days. I want to pause to add, these are not just tasks that students will just complete on their own. By adding tools like Screencastify, what I can do is I can create a screencast of a particular concept or something that I'd like to model. And that's instruction that students can have available for themselves at any time and on demand as many times as they need it. So my instruction can continue. I might preview some ideas on Monday and Thursday and then reinforce them through videos that students can watch on their own on Tuesday and Friday. The next model, which parents could choose from, was the full remote instructional model. Now, initially, we were anticipating kind of a synchronous and asynchronous daily routine that was the same Monday through Friday. However, when 50% of our families elected for remote, we could no longer support that kind of model. And so we ended up with this proposal that I'm sharing with you tonight. 5 days of remote learning means that these students elected not to be in the physical classroom for any days of the week. And here's what their schedule looks like. You can see there's the computer icon across the week, but they also have synchronous and asynchronous time. And after I review this student schedule, I'm going to review then what it looks like for a teacher. So students will have asynchronous learning on Mondays. They'll be doing the same kinds of things that their hybrid counterparts would have been doing on Tuesdays and Fridays, but their days for asynchronous learning are Mondays and Thursdays. Again, they're going to have a minimum of 5 hours of learning and a maximum of 50 minutes per class period. On Tuesday, these students are going to run the bell schedule from home. So if I'm Mrs. Detman and I teach first hour freshman English, which I always had, then I'm going to Zoom in or some other platform, but likely Zoom. I'm going to Zoom in with all of my class at the same time, all my remote learners at the same time. I'm going to take attendance, I'm going to check in with them, and then I'm going to do the same kind of lesson that I did with my in-person students. I'm going to take about 15 minutes to launch a new idea, explore a concept, model, and then I'm going to give them time to do some small group work, to collaborate, and I'm going to use my digital tools so that we can do that together in real time. I'm going to close that lesson by making sure that all my students are ready for what's next on Wednesday and on Thursday, because they're going to be not with me on Wednesday and Thursday. On Wednesday, I'll explain a little bit. Thursday, they're back to an asynchronous day, which means they're doing all of that research and collaboration and discussion. I have recorded videos and they can access them whenever they need to. I might be using GoGuardian. We're working on the concept of office hours so that there is a regularly scheduled time for students to check in with teachers. And then on Friday, I'm back to synchronous in-time learning with my teacher. I'm running my bell schedule from home, which means that I have embedded lunch as well and a break. And I'm running my bell schedule from home. My teacher is doing the same thing, kind of about 15 minutes of kind of quote unquote teacher talk, and then lots of time for class interaction. One thing that is a particular challenge and we want to make sure we build in enough time for is for students who are in a remote environment to have a sense of community. And that's where these synchronous instruction days are so critical. That's where they get to know their peers as people. It's where they get to be funny. If I was teaching, I would really hope that they'd be laughing at all my jokes and not making fun of me in the chat. But this is the chance in synchronous days when teachers and students are creating that sense of community, even though they're not in the classroom together. I mentioned some of these key points already. Following the bell schedule, embedding checks for understanding. We don't want anyone to get lost in a remote model. Limiting teacher talk and really allowing students to do that deep learning, deep questioning, and then introducing next step for any asynchronous learning that would be next. A couple of key questions that teachers will need to focus on is how are we going to check in? When can you expect to hear from me again? When will I expect to hear from you? And how will you ask for feedback and show learning? One tool that's on our board agenda tonight for approval is called Formative. We know from our school quality survey results and our remote learning survey from the spring that what teachers and students feel like they really need is timely and descriptive feedback about their progress. And so in a remote environment, a tool like Formative will help us get there. So what does all of this look like for teachers? Because that sounds like an awful lot. It is. Teachers are going to be teaching in person only 2 days a week. That means that in our schools, there will only be students in the building 2.5 days a week. We will have those small group interventions in the morning on Wednesdays. They'll be running their class schedule on Monday, Thursday. On Tuesday and Friday, they're going to be in their classroom, but they're going to be running their bell schedule virtually with their remote students. So on Monday and Thursday, only the students that are under 20 class size in person with them. Tuesday, Friday, running that bell schedule with only remote students. On Wednesday, they will play a role in ensuring that small intervention groups run successfully. I'm going to go ahead and pause there and just ask if there's any clarifying questions that you'd like to ask on the hybrid and remote instructional models. And then I'd like to move into the Wednesday model and just focus there.
Ms. McCullough.
So are they using the curriculum that they already have, the district curriculum?
Correct.
And does that curriculum give them guidance as to what they provide for their students for asynchronous learning? And has that been an addition that you provided, or your deans or whatever over the last, couple of weeks? I mean, because this has just changed.
Well, we've been preparing for remote learning for a long time. In terms of the model, yes, we are refining our screen time guidelines, our daily time guidelines, and then kind of essential tools. But yes, we've been meeting every day since early June in instructional subcommittees by grade level, and they've been developing very detailed guidance, not only on tools needed, but on essential content, and then how to work in learning loss from the spring into the content of the next grade level.
So we're saying to students that you're getting 5 hours a day, and we've already said that it needs to be during the hours by the bell schedule, even on their asynchronous days. Who's checking to make sure that they're in there doing their piece? I know we bought one piece of software at our last meeting or meetings ago to help us teachers look at that, but who's actually physically taking attendance for each of those hours, each of those 50 minutes for our secondary students?
So that will be, teachers will be taking attendance. We're working right now, and Mr. Barthel here is our thought partner, on the mechanics of making that happen no matter the day of the week. But we believe we have the tools in place to make that happen. We're working on some instructions for how to do that. So that's not completely finished yet, but we are working on those details now.
Because if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching person to person, I'm not going to be sitting there on the asynchronous days for my remote learners, making sure that each group is there for each of the 50. So you're saying it's going to be done with technology But
Student work and time will be time-stamped and logged. And so at the end of the day, a teacher will be able to ensure that students have put in the work that they needed to put in.
so
and
it'll
that
be
they
logged
clocked in.
how long they are on different platforms or using
Do you want to,
different.
yep, go ahead.
So yeah, that'd be great if you could share that. Thank
Sure.
you.
Sure. So this is with the ClassLink application that we're purchasing. So if I'm a student, I'm logging in centrally to that application to get to all my other applications. And when I log in, it will actually track the time, even by class and by application I'm using. So if I log into my pre-algebra course or whatever that might be, it'll say I've been logged into that. I log in at this time for this application, and I was logged in for 42 minutes. And then we can actually grab that information out of the system for attendance purposes as well and integrate that into our student information system.
Does it indicate activity as well as logging in, or can I just log in and head off and do my gaming and then come back and say, okay, I did my 50 minutes?
It's actual activity for the system itself.
And then I guess this goes to Ms. Detman. So what are the consequences if I'm not? Because
Well, this is just like in-person learning. I can show up to class, but if my head's on the desk and I'm not participating, or if I'm not turning in my work, I have an academic consequence. So we are going to be monitoring student progress. They're going to be turning in assignments just like they always have been. And just like in real life, real learning, I suppose, in-person learning, there are consequences if you don't do your work. The Wednesday interventions are going to help us make sure that we're keeping track of students and that we're giving them ample opportunity for reteaching if they need it, for work completion if they need it. And I think we have to understand too that there will be a learning curve for students as well. And we need to be very closely monitoring their success so that they don't get behind.
Well, if it's on progress, I mean, I have 3 kids and they worked at different speeds and at different levels of if 90% was an A, why would you go for 95 or 100? I mean, that's just a whole lot of extra work. But if you have students and they can get their work done in 10 minutes and you're saying, oh, they were only on their platform for 10 minutes and they were supposed to be there for 50 minutes. I mean, holding them with a consequence seems just as unfair as the one who
I think
didn't even go on. So I realize there's a lot of kinks to work out, and the ClassLink will be helpful.
Yeah, I think we also need to kind of lead with learning, right, as opposed to punitive measures for screen time. I actually saw a post on social media about like a way to break down points versus whether or not your eyes were looking in the camera, how engaged your teacher perceived you were. And I absolutely would not advise that kind of approach here. We're looking at student learning and student engagement.
So who's responsible then for the technological piece of getting that information back to the teacher? Because now, excuse me, teacher's going to have 2 sets of classes, but under 20, but that's still more than, will they still be at contractual
Yeah,
limit?
their class size limit will be maintained. They'll just have 15 maybe on Monday and the other 13 to
So they will have a
15
max
on
of
Tuesday.
150 for secondary
Correct.
students, no matter what.
They'll be rostered as if it's a regular year. Their students are divided by their choice.
Okay. And as I said, I'm supporting the plan. I know you guys have worked really hard on it, but in some ways having students be face-to-face 5 days a week, 4 days a week, even if you hadn't done the Wednesday. And we're going to go over Wednesday. You're going to do that in a minute, so I'll save that question. Is a real loss and I think this is a lot of work for teachers. I really respect the work that they're going to have to do to make this happen and work. Trust that they're going to be engaged and committed to do that.
Well, and I think it's our job to be checking in every step of the way here to ask how can we make this better, what's working and what's not working.
So if you have a teacher who is, this might be a Matt Zediger question, if you have a teacher who is teaching, there's more than one teacher teaching algebra, and at a certain level, and we will, I'm just trying to think how you would meet the needs of the teacher who has the medical piece with somebody coming in. Is there a way that they could teach all 4 remote days? But there really isn't.
Well, so
Because then
I'll
somebody
go,
else would have to pick up the 2 in-person days.
yeah, I'll go back to the teacher schedule, and actually I had made a note to myself to pause on this slide. Since we were talking about teachers with accommodations, and so Mr. Zediker, feel free to correct me. But essentially what would happen is if you had an accommodation, you would be remotely instructing from home all 5 days of the week. But on the 2 days when your class was there, we would have another, likely a paraprofessional or a substitute teacher who would be in the room with students supporting their learning while you were doing your synchronous instruction remotely.
So
you'd be
excuse me, but you
synchronous.
just said from home, and I thought
I'm
we will
sorry.
make
I apologize.
accommodations for everybody.
From
to be-
another location. That
Okay,
is
thank you.
my mistake. I apologize. That was a big, thank you. Thank you
I
for
know what
moving
you-
closer
Because
to
believe me,
different.
the ones listening are gonna say,
Yes.
oh, good, that changed. And-
Yeah, I apologize. Where you're remotely instructing from your remote location.
A safe remote.
A safe remote
Okay.
location, correct. I apologize. Any
Okay,
other questions?
Mr. Rollins, you have some questions?
I had some of the same concerns as Mrs. McCulloch, but I'm going to back up. So for the remote learners in particular, we know we had a low participation rate in remote learning, distance learning in the spring. What happens if we start seeing those same low participation rates? I mean, you talked about academic consequences. If we have a situation where a kid's not coming to school and they're truant, we have like youth services network. Are we going to be doing the same thing here?
Yes.
And I'm a little curious, are those remote learning people going to count in our truancy statistics as well? Like if they're not actually participating, does that show up in our truancy statistics?
I would believe so. Dr. Vosper, would you like to add in?
Our best guess tonight would be yes. I mean, we are taking attendance and we'll report that data to the state. So we haven't received any guidance from the state that would be treated differently.
Okay. So I can make a prediction about that, I guess. I'm a little curious. This actually goes for all grade levels, but I know this is a secondary. Are we going to be doing, let me ask internally and externally, like internally our map testing, are we going to be doing map testing across the board for both distance learners and in-person learners?
That's a decision that we're making this week. We have a couple webinars with NWEA, and then a meeting coming up with our consultant from NWEA who owns MAP. So I'm not ready to say that yet, but we're working on those details now.
And then is there any indication, because we know what's going on across the state, what is the state going to do for standardized testing this year?
We don't have any definitive answers on standardized testing at this time. A couple of guesses would be that it might be administered but not used for accountability. It would depend fully on where we are in the spring testing window. So I think that's a big unknown for everyone right now.
Going back, and this is something that Mrs. McCulloch covered, but I just want to ask a more specific question. So on the asynchronous days, I think I heard you say we're going to have some way for somebody to figure out whether kids are actually putting in the 5 hours a day. Is that something that can be spit out as an automatic report as opposed to having the teacher have to go through that? Okay.
Yes. So with our ClassLink, that's also on the board agenda for tonight, between ClassLink and GoGuardian and Formative, we have lots of really great tools, not only to monitor participation through a teacher dashboard, but then also with Formative, there's even kind of like an anti-cheat feature for when you're assessing students who are working remotely. So all of this is, as I mentioned, relatively new, but we believe these digital tools will help us get at some of these problems that we encountered in the spring, such as lack of engagement and participation from students.
So how is and I'm just asking these questions because I'm curious and I wonder if there's even any answers out there. How is the truancy going to be calculated for the asynchronous days? Like if somebody shows up for an hour, but not 5 hours?
Well, my assumption would be like it's skipping a class. By period, isn't it, Nadia?
Repeat the question again.
So on the asynchronous days, how are we going to count that as attendance for purposes of truancy, absenteeism? Good question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good
good
question.
question.
We're learning as we go on that one. I will take attendance. How the state will calculate it. We've moved away from the minutes in a day calculation. So I don't think it's going to impact. It's either going to be they're participating that day or they're not. A few years ago, they switched back and forth. It was based on minutes, and that's not the formula anymore.
Be determined. Just in case, well, I probably will have more questions on Wednesday, so I'll save. The one comment I was just going to make, just in case there's anybody still watching, there probably isn't, but I'm just going to ask for everybody at every level, parents, kids, staff, to be patient. I can guarantee you that some of this isn't going to work. Some of it will work. We're going to be learning as we go. This is unprecedented. So everybody's just going to have to be patient and flexible, and I'll thank everybody in advance for their patience.
You know, I would echo that that statement, and I thank you for making it. We are truly, you know, turning on a dime as we have more and more information. And, you know, now that we're getting to the point where our model is pretty well laid out and we understand the construct of instruction, now we need to get into those deeper levels that you're asking about and we're curious about as well, which is on that, you know, accountability, but really more for engagement. We don't want to lose any students, you know, in this atmosphere. We want them to stay engaged and connected and have that sense of community, whether they're at home or they're in the classroom.
Ms. McCullough, did you have a follow-up question?
Oh, I did. You just mentioned the Go Guardian and the fundamentals and the other, and we're just approving some tonight, and school starts in 2 weeks. And how well will our teachers be prepared to utilize all these, or is it not necessary and it's all coming from IT and they're going to spit out the reports to the teachers? I mean, then the teachers can follow up and say, okay, I see you weren't here, because they're already learning and working with a lot of platforms, and especially for the asynchronous, to add these on to they only work as well as we use them.
So these, ClassLink is very much in the background, and it will, I mean, by accessing their dashboard, that's the primary work that's involved there. And we have training already organized for every grade level and content area on Teacher Institute days. This connects with our school calendar conversation as well. We felt we needed a bit more time. Go Guardian is a tool that does not require a lot of training to use its most basic capacity, but as teachers learn more and more and grow more comfortable, they'll be able to utilize additional tools within it to really kind of ramp up the tool's utility. And then the others, we've had thousands of workshops, hundreds of workshops by thousands of people here over the summer and spring, and teachers are doing a lot of learning, and they have been doing a lot of learning, but we're also providing ongoing time, both on the 4 Teacher Institute days prior to students arriving, and then some embedded planning days in the fall, so that as teachers kind of learn and get ready for the next level, we have time set aside for them to engage in professional development. So we know
sharing those reports with parents who want to know if their kids are doing the work, or is that not something you thought about?
I don't know that I have an answer for that in terms of what does the report look like and what would it say. But I would say, just if I put my teacher hat on, if I had any student not really engaging with me in-person instruction, I would want to call their parents and make sure that they understood their level of engagement.
And I understand that from a negative viewpoint, but I think the kids who are doing their work deserve an attaboy for for their time that they're putting in. So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and move on to Wednesdays. As Mr. Rollins noted, there may be not too many people watching anymore, maybe boring. Let's see. Wednesday instruction, here we go. This is 1 day in-person or remote intervention groups. We want students on Wednesdays to be able to get what they need for additional support. So I'm going to walk through our model as it stands today, but I also want to share that we're meeting every Monday, every week until we get this right. We have principals on our collaborative group, as well as our school supervision team and representatives from Ed Services. So this is still in progress, but here's where we are right now. Right now, we know that on Wednesdays, we want students to either be in person or remotely receiving intervention or other targeted support for what they need. Our bus routes will run as regularly scheduled, but there'll be an abbreviated day. We're calling these, this is a common term, what I need or WIN Wednesdays, and it's based on the model of MTSS, which we've talked about quite a lot, but stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. In the teal, you can see Tier 1. This is where kind of the bulk of students are. To the left of middle, you can see intervention for Tier 2. It's where some students need some more. And then in purple to the left of the yellow, you can see intensive intervention, where you can see that few students need much more. On the other side of the pyramid, this is our chance for enrichment. So yellow is some students need more, and intensive extension is a few students need quite a bit more to meet them where they are in their learning. So this is our model overall for organizing students into groups on Wednesdays. What does this look like? I'm going to start with a graphic about how these groups are generated. Students will be organized based on PLC planning and collaboration. Wednesdays also give our teachers opportunities to meet in professional learning communities, to analyze data, to talk about student progress, both in person and remote. Who's meeting their learning targets? How did they do on our last common formative assessment? Just how are they doing overall as a person? And so we have a space here in the PLC for every role that works with students, from Title I teachers to counselors to the PE teacher, fine arts teacher, instructional coach, building administrators, and classroom teachers. They're going to be looking at multiple data points, type 1, type 2, type 3 assessments, which is technical, but essentially means different types of assessments for different purposes that give us a kind of a broad view of a student's progress. They're going to use that time to give feedback, record, review, and look at the history of the student. And then they're going to assign that student into the support that they need. What we're going to be able to do is have 3 different intervention small group blocks of 45 minutes. What we're proposing at this point in time in our working group is 30 minutes in the morning for check-in. That also gives opportunity for social emotional support, either in small groups with a social worker or a guidance counselor, or even just a teacher leader who is working with students who have a need. Then 45 minutes is small group 1. That can be intervention or enrichment, followed by a movement break, their next small group, and then their third small group, and then 10 minutes for a kind of a check-in. How are you? How did things go? And then dismissal for the day, where they will also take food home with them. In these 3 small groups, it'll be divided up for 20 minutes of instruction with a teacher, 20 minutes for independent work. What we learned over the summer from our remote summer school teachers is that this model really worked for them. And what they did is they would have their teachers or their students all on Zoom with them remotely. They would do kind of 20 minutes of instruction, whether that's through a screencast or other tools. And then they'd have their students just mute and do some independent work for 20 minutes. The teacher's still live with them. So if a student has, if they're struggling, if they need help, they can go ahead and unmute and ask for help and have real time. But they have 20 minutes to work independently while the teacher's still with them, and then 5 minutes to all check in. These small groups are going to be focused on literacy and numeracy and project-based support and work completion. We also understand, however, that many students have many different kinds of needs. And so we're working on kind of a menu of supports that could span everything from SAT prep for some of our high school students to perhaps a freshman success cohort. What we're aiming for is these small groups to last between 4 and 6 weeks, so that students have repetition and time over those 4 to 6 weeks to demonstrate growth. At that point then, PLCs could decide either continue that child in a similar intervention because they're making progress, or they're going to move to other groups. So the goal is that each student has 3 areas of focus every Wednesday targeted to their needs. The remainder of Wednesdays, this is the final slide here, the remainder of those Wednesdays will be time for professional learning, PLC collaboration, student feedback, that kind of thing. We've not fully fleshed out the afternoon yet, but this is our proposal and this is where we're at right now for structuring Wednesdays. Again, our goal is to give every student what they need on that day a week, whether that's social emotional support or academic support. So one of these small groups could very well be with a guidance counselor, a behavior intervention specialist, you know, any number of folks in our schools who can offer that SEL support as well. So I'll pause there and I'll take any questions that you have on Wednesdays.
I just want to make one suggestion because we do have a lot of things left on the agenda to do, that if you have big overall, big picture questions, I think we can handle those now, but deeper dive, detailed questions, I'm going to suggest that board members can submit those questions to Dr. Jarrett, and then he'll have the appropriate person follow up with us and share the answer with the group. If you have big picture questions for Heidi, Mr. Rollins, you want to go first?
Yeah, it's not even a question, it's just a quick comment, and it just circles back to, I've just been thinking about what we talked about on the assessments. We're going to be delivering instruction in 2 very different ways to students. I think it would be a real shame if we couldn't figure out a way to do assessments, because I think it's going to be valuable data. And it who knows what it's going to show. I mean, I tend to think that in-person instruction is better. Maybe we'll find out that remote instruction is better. In which case we could remake the face of American education. Good point. But I really do think that it's important that we figure out a way to do assessments.
Okay, Ms. McCullough?
I disagree with you, Ken, because I think there are people who want answers, including teachers. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Okay. I apologize. What do kids, so you have 3 small groups, but the bus comes in the morning and then it leaves at the end of whatever the morning. What do those students do when it's not their 45 minutes?
We want them in 3 different groups, whether that's
so they participate 3 times in the 45 minutes, 45 minutes. That wasn't clear. It sounds
I apologize.
Like a small group 1 and 2 and 3, and you do yours first, then the next group, then the next group. So they're participating the whole time.
Correct.
Can both remote and in-person attend on Wednesday? Say I'm a remote teacher and you know I have a remote student and they are struggling, and I think they need to come in on Wednesday for that extra intervention. Does that have to be provided remotely, or can they get it remotely, or do they have to come in person?
Everything that is offered in person will be offered remotely.
But the teacher's got to do both a remote and an in person at the same time.
Not necessarily one teacher. So this is really kind of an all hands on deck, organizing what the menu of supports would be. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one.
Are the groups static? I mean,
for
can
4 to 6
students be added as we go along? I mean, 3rd week in, I really noticed Johnny really needs more help.
Yes. We aim for 4 to 6 to be consistent. But if a student needs, you know, kind of an immediate intervention, yes, we would advise that they be added to a group.
So, and you notice, I know so all these people on the PLCs, who's like going to be in charge of the PLCs to decide who's there? I've got a teacher who, like my pregnant teacher, and doesn't want to physically be there. Who's going to put it all together, get it set up, and who's responsible for that?
So our school administrators are always responsible for PLCs and participation, and so unless I'm incorrect here, but yeah, that's their responsibility to support PLCs in their school.
And that'll be by building the PLCs, I take it. Last question is not about secondary, but I'm with Mr. Rollins on the testing, and one of the areas we asked previously, and I don't remember hearing an answer, what are we doing about kinders? Because we have a baseline with them, it's a face-to-face, a 40 minutes a piece. What did she tell us? And I missed it. So tell us what we're doing with kinders, please.
Okay, so with kindergarten students, we are going to be, let me back up. Remote kindergarten students in particular, is that who you're asking about?
Right, because they're coming into the building, I'm thinking.
Sure, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So with Seesaw, we're able to work with families to really record students reading or demonstrating their learning, and then a teacher can watch that for the observation-based assessment for kids.
And that gives enough information for that initial baseline assessment that we need?
If we're targeted and really working tightly with parent partners, yes, we're doing the same thing in early childhood, where you can't just ask children to take an assessment on an iPad and think that's going to be enough information. It's not.
Right, but we have a specific.
It's called the KIDS. It's the Kindergarten Individual Development Survey.
And you can do that remotely. My
Well,
understanding
it's based on,
from our last conversation is you couldn't. So
well, we're working on that. I don't want to call that a final response right now. We're kind of digging into those details now, but I'd be happy to provide an update on our guidance to teachers as we finalize that over the next couple of weeks. The state has also, just in their last update, released some information and guidance on kids, in that, you know, if I recall correctly, the guidance was, we want you to gather as much observational information as possible, but kids is not used for accountability. I believe that was the update, but I need to go back in. Like I said, we're working on those details over the next couple of weeks, especially for young children.
well, and again, Mr. Alms, you're right. It's very valuable because we'll have in-person kinders and we'll have the remotes, and let's see where they start and end up. But I just don't know, based on what I've seen of that test, I don't know how you do it. Thank you.
Mr. Siegel.
For the sake of argument, let's say at the end of the year we move into phase 5 and everybody comes back to school. Is this going to remain the instructional model, or do we say, all right, we're going back to normal?
Well, I don't know, because, you know, 6 weeks from now is still a little bit fuzzy. But here's what I hope. What I hope is that, you know, we're using the gift of time here and this major disruption to our traditional ways of thinking and operating to do things a little bit differently. And what I'm curious about as we move through this model is the value that we find in pausing and sometimes just asking, what do you need? And how can we help? And so instead of plowing through 5 days because we have to do 5 days because we've always done 5 days, what if we didn't? And what if we just paused and provided more time for collaboration and more time for targeted support? And then we'll see if this is something that is such a value add that we go back to the drawing board on how we've always done things and ask, how can this continue? Maybe in a different way, in a modified format, but how can we protect time a little bit differently in our model? Or we could decide, you know, we want to go back to traditional way. I mean, I think that's where we need to have tight partnerships and feedback loops with teachers and administrators. You're welcome.
I'll just share what Chad mentioned from the REA on Monday in DLT, that his hope was, kind of relates to David's question. His hope was that this may move the needle more than we even think it might move the needle for achievement, and we may gain some valuable tools that we can adopt as the normal when we get back to all in the building. That's coming. Mr. Connor.
Yeah, thank you. So I have an overall question. Is this our first reading tonight, is what we're going through? What is the end result of
This is a report as opposed to an action item.
So we're having a lot of questions on details of this. So are we approving something?
You are not. We are implementing the plan and we are updating you as it evolves. So I'd be happy to bring it back as it continues on the 25th.
Okay. I'm not asking for it to be brought back, but I think my point is we're asking a lot of detailed questions. So I really want to be clear. We're going to be here all night. So since this was one of our places that we can comment overall on the planning, I will actually do that. So first of all, a lot of this is tied to the tech plan, and there are details on that. And thankfully, I sat down with a number of folks and went through this. So I'm comfortable that the tools have a lot of automated integration and pleased with that. There's clearly been a lot of thought to this. My comments are more, I've been very much in favor of the hybrid model and still like it. One of the things that I'll say is that there have been a lot of legitimate concerns about how we're going to do the actual implementation of all this. And so I truly think that with all the concerns we have, there's been a lot of good thought on how the remote model is going to work.
Can I interrupt for just 1 second? I'm reminded by my better half on this side of the wall that you should have your mask on while you're speaking. Okay, thank you.
Whatever. Yeah. Not that we can understand half the words that come out with the mask, but whatever.
We're asking our staff.
Yeah,
so.
Right. So anyway, I think the point that I'd make is that what has changed my mind a little is that I understand the concern that people have. I will just say that at a practical level, whether I like it or not, we are one of the few school districts that's large that stands on this. I know that a lot of the smaller school districts here in the county have committed to in-person, which I think for a lot of people is 5 days a week, if I understood correctly. What I would say is that the two big concerns we've said as a board, and I think the one thing that I'd like to challenge teachers on is if the majority of teachers really want to be remote only, the first criteria from my point of view is that we have to be able to implement this so that our at-risk kids, and as a reminder, 55 to 60% poverty, we have a lot of at-risk kids, and that the equipment we're putting out and the plan we're doing is quite good, but there's going to have to be real people follow-up and investment, and that's not just administrative. So I'd say the first challenge, and we've had a number of people say it about assessments, but I think it goes much beyond assessment. We have a lot of kids that are struggling, and if we really want to do remote only, we're going to really have to reach out to those families and make sure that those kids are engaged and that they're not going to be losing ground. So that's the first thing. And we absolutely have to have teachers. The other thing I'm going to say is, and as unpopular as this would be, if we do go all remote, that will affect how we staff. So for everybody who wants it all remote, I think that that is a factor that you have to keep in play when we talk about how we're going to reach out to everybody. So that would be the first thing I would say. And I'm leaning more towards the fact that remote makes a lot of sense, especially understanding the concerns. But one thing I will say that's ironic is finding out that there's a lot of openings in remote learning for teachers that have not been, nobody's applied for it, does give me some real pause, because I'm fully prepared to say, let's go do that. But it's really, I think, surprising. So that's the first overall thing is we've got to have a plan and a means of executing so that at-risk kids really are not losing ground. The second thing I've got, and I think there's been a lot of good work, is that the technology that's being presented has to be part and parcel of teaching. That no longer can we have it as an addition, an add-on, is that this has to be at the heart of teaching now. If we want to be remote, and for all those that are clamoring for remote only, there is an accountability on technology that is going to be, I think, large. And there will have to be a commitment to that technology to really make curriculum and everything else work. So I've moved, I will say this out loud, a lot more sympathetic to the remote part, but there are two things that we have to address. Again, number one is we have to say how we are going to make our at-risk kids successful, as all kids, but we're especially concerned about that. And second is the commitment and the accountability on the use and the integration of technology as part and parcel of the teaching experience.
Thank you. Mrs. Detman, is that it from you?
That does conclude my report.
All right.
And now I would like to apologize to our guest, Dr. Blakelock, who's been waiting a little over an hour, but obviously these are very challenging times. And we do have our report that we're going to be introducing. And so I'm going to turn it over to our accountability team to introduce Dr. Blakelock and review how our survey results from last year came in. This is something that we've made a big investment in. Obviously, we had some significant interruptions at the beginning of the year with the tech outage and at the end of the year with the pandemic, but we had principals and faculty and staff, and the accountability team worked really hard to get these results in, and so I think it does deserve the board's attention. I think we will give a very high-level overview, and then we'll take feedback from the board.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Jarrett. I'm Jeff Lowry, Data Research Manager for the Accountability Team. Our team, which consists of Brooke Peterson, Mary Call, and myself, would like to welcome Dr. Blakelock here tonight. Our team works closely with Dr. Dave Blakelock on two annual surveys, the School Quality Survey and Employee Engagement Survey. Just a reminder, the Employee Engagement Survey is for staff. We hold that in the fall, and that measures the level of employee engagement. We've done that 3 years now, so we have good trend data there. The School Quality Survey, which started this year in January and just finished at the beginning of June at the end of the school year, that measures parents' perception of school quality, and we've now done that 2 years in a row. So we now have some good trend data. It's actually a favorable trend that Dr. Blakelock will share with you now.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, Dr. Jarrett, members of the board. Thank you for having me out this evening. I feel like a lot has changed in the world since I last stood in your boardroom last December presenting to you. And I know there's a lot of important decisions to be made, so I want to thank you for taking the time to hear me this evening. I will go ahead and share my screen now so that I can walk through the presentation as we go. Okay, so basically, just to give you an overview of the survey itself, the primary pieces that we take a look at within this survey are academic support, student support, school leadership, family involvement, safety and behavior, some communication, and towards the end of April, we actually added some questions to the survey regarding perceptions of district response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was an interesting year for surveys, as you can probably imagine. This survey actually launched in the middle of January. When districts started shutting down in about mid-March or so, we just sort of went silent on everybody. There was a lot of work to be done, so we just sort of stepped out of the way of everyone. And I think around the beginning, middle of March, we came back to take a look at what our game plan was going to be. The initial window is going to be from mid-June to early April, with the caveat being that a lot of data collection is going to happen through paper surveys during parent-teacher conference nights. Obviously, we lost the opportunity to do that, but we were able to actually get a fairly decent response despite that. We did actually end up keeping the survey open through the last day of school on June 3rd. We had the survey translated into Spanish and Arabic. We did add those questions to the survey about the pandemic on the 27th. A couple of different things to note is that, we'll actually break these down by school level, and that this does not reflect random sampling. Rather, it's the result of the perception of opinions of the survey participants. So when we take a look at the participation, what we see this year is actually participation was greater this year than it was last year. We see that total of 7,459. 1,884 of those came in through survey invitations. And an additional roughly 6,000 came in through a variety of different public access links. 1,381 of those were from paper surveys, and a little over 1,000 of those were for parents who actually took the survey from an additional school when they finished the first one through. When we look down the breakdown of the languages in which the survey was taken, we see that roughly 90% of it was English and 10% of it was Spanish. One of the things I shared with the district leadership team when we walked through this is that is probably the best Spanish population participation I've seen in the Midwest, if not across the country. So really should be proud of how you were able to get the voice of your Spanish-speaking population. The other thing you'll see below that is what the breakdown of responses was before and after school closure. So it's about a 60-40 split, 60% before the schools closed and an additional 40% after the schools closed due to the pandemic. You can see here the breakdown of how participants, just the sort of the percentage of responses. I mentioned the email invitation, but we also had, the custom URL with the paper surveys. There was a specific link on the school website, and then we had specific links for social media pieces. We do that so we can just really see where the most popular channels are for participation, so we know really where to push for additional participation. So when we look at the overall school quality, we basically see a very similar trend from this year to last year. Actually, it goes up 1 percentage point, the combined excellent and good. So you're looking at a really solid 84% rating your school as excellent or good. When you look at the breakdown of that by school level, you see as children get older, we see a decline in that perception. And that's very common what we see across the country. A lot of times, parents of younger children, the school model is a lot simpler. As they get into high school, they are starting to look closer to, what the outcome is going to look like as far as when their children graduate. And so they become a little bit more educated about education as well. So we tend to see those perceptions decline in agreeability or favorability as the students get older. What this is right here is that we have the comparison of the overall dimensions. So, within academic support, there's 6 or 7 questions that make up the academic support dimension, and 4 or 5 for student support, and so on. What we see here is the percentage of strongly agree or agree responses in each of those dimensions. And as you can see here, there's a gain in each one of the dimensions across the board as compared to last year. I'm going to move through some of these fairly quickly, just so that we don't spend too much time on this, but I'm happy to take questions when I'm done. What I'll focus on here is that we see that continued trend of young to high in terms of favorability of perception. And the other thing I'll bring up is taking a look at the trends from year to year. The two I really want to point out here, the one I really want to point out here is that 3 percentage point gain and teachers successfully show students how lessons relate to life outside of school. That is a concept that districts across the country really struggle with. And that's a fairly decent score for that, not to mention that you've gained 3 percentage points right there as well. The other thing I'll call your attention to is the perceptions of high school parents around timely and helpful feedback around academic work, seeing that sort of a lower bit. And I think that probably can very much influenced as the pandemic and trying to think about how that virtual education will play. When we look at student support, fairly favorable responses here as well. And again, we either see the same or an increase as compared to last year. With school leadership, the one I really want to call your attention to is school administrators make decisions that are in the best interest of students. We saw a 3 percentage point gain there as well. So some very strong perceptions of how your school administrators are doing from a parental perspective. When we look at family involvement, the one I'll call your attention to here is the one on the bottom, the 17% don't know of how the school uses family input to improve instruction. We do see a 3 percentage point increase compared to last year. The real value in that one is it speaks to that parent-school collaboration, that bond, parents having that perception of doing with instead of doing to. Really, the research tells us has a very strong impact on student achievement. When we look at safety and behavior, we look at the trend over time. We see that 3 percentage point increase in staff members being aware of safety and security procedures, as well as 3 percentage point increase in staff members being responsive when students report bullying. You'll see that that looks a little low, but when we go back to that full distribution, we see that 22% and that 13% there of don't know. A lot of times if if their children have not experienced bullying, they're not really going to know what the response or the reaction is to it. What we have here is the highest and lowest ranking indicators. So the green box in the top is the highest ranking indicators, and that is the highest combined percentage of strongly agree or agree items across the survey. So one thing I'll point out here that's very favorable is those bottom two. The school has high learning standards for all students, and teachers set high expectations for all students. That actually speaks to the perception of academic rigor that you have from the parent perspective. The other one I'll call out is the one at the top there, is that staff members and families treat each other with respect. That really speaks to some of that collaborative pieces that I was talking about a few moments ago. When we look at the bottom box, the yellow box there in the bottom, what we see is the highest percentage of strongly disagree or disagree responses. We do disagreement here because the don't know would sometimes skews the agreement. So this is a self-contained data set. So you're always going to have a high and you're always going to have a low. So the first observation I'll make is the fact that your lowest ranking indicator is only at 17% is a fairly positive thing to take away. 1 out of 5 is basically at your, less than 1 out of 5 is at your worst. The piece that we take a look at there is going to be that academic support piece right there. The other one we'll see is the safety and behavior piece, the discipline's enforced fairly. We'll actually see in some of the open-ended feedback, the themes there is about perceptions of discipline not being being enforced as it should be, some calls for restorative justice practices, equal expectations across the board, those sorts of things. When we ask parents about their preferred communication methods, we have this right here. This is very common with what we see across the country, with email and text message being the top two. And then the other thing I'll talk to is the COVID-19 initiatives. I want to take a step back here and just talk about this from a national perspective with the school districts we work with. You were faced with a situation where an educational system that had been slowly evolving over 150 years had to change drastically within a couple of days. And so there was a lot of, build the plane as we fly, trying to figure out what was happening. And we saw this with districts across the country as they struggled with how to implement distance learning and how to provide services to children, that were remote. And then we watched over the summer as we talked about what models should we open with. And now it's moved for some districts into which version of virtual education are we going to work with. So we're seeing that evolution across the country with all the districts that we work with, from California all the way up into upstate New York. But what we ask is basically the quality of each of the items below. And what you'll see is that the end count's going to be a little different because there was a not applicable option, and the not applicable responses were excluded from calculations. So the two lowest that we see here is the distance learning website and the teacher lesson plan for students. And when we dug into some of the qualitative data on that, what we found was some concerns from parents about the decentralization of the information on the websites. They had to go to this website and sign up here, that website and sign in over there, as opposed to wanting just kind of a one-stop shop. And the other piece was just the overall teacher lesson plans for students. Again, it was something where they actually had to make a quick change, a quick transition in a time of crisis. But these are just some data points to kind of think about as you look to grow going forward. We see here just that breakdown by school level. Again, we see that continued trend of low to high. As they are younger, they are more favorable responses. And then this right here is the Net Promoter Score. This was a concept we introduced to the district a couple years ago. I think it was 2 years ago on the Employee Engagement Scale survey. And we have got a little bit of a different visualization here for it today. But basically, parents are asked how likely they are to recommend their child's school in one question, and how likely they are to recommend Rockford Public Schools 205 in another question. What we do is anyone that the scale is not at all likely, which is a 0, all the way up to 10, which is extremely likely. So anyone who selects a 0 to 6 is a detractor. Anyone who has a 7 or 8 is a passive. And anyone is 9 to a 10 is a promoter. So we actually come up with an overall magnitude by taking the percentage of detractors and subtracting that from the percentage of promoters. So when we take a look at the school Net Promoter Score is 24, which is actually a 1-point increase from what it was last year. What I'll also share with you is that our national trend overall for that is 30, and the trend for medium-sized districts, which is where you fall, is 33. On the district side, we see the Net Promoter Score being at -1, which is really close to that ratio of equal in the middle. That's actually a 5-point increase from what we saw last year. Overall, our nationwide benchmark is that the district is 26, and for a medium-sized district is 25. But what we're seeing is a fairly decent movement, an increase in that as the school year, as compared to last year. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly. This is just the the open-ended feedback, but basically we asked parents how they can earn a higher rating from them next year. A lot of it had to do with communication, some pieces around student behavior, some desire to change the curriculum and instruction, and then the overall facilities as well. For those that rated as a promoter, so they gave a 9 to 10 on the school for a Net Promoter Score, we asked them why they were so likely. And so the responses we got that, parents really liked the teachers. They said, the teachers were high quality. They like the outstanding educational opportunities, and that the schools provide a safe, supportive, and positive learning environment. When we look at the opportunities for improvement, and this question was asked to those who gave anywhere between a 0 and an 8. So if they were detractor or positive to a school, they were asked this question. So we see again, a little bit about safety and behavior as far as student behavior. We see a request to increase supports for students in the classroom. Some concerns about policies, code of conduct, dress code, those sorts of things. And then greater accessibility to leaders as well. So right here, I have the key insights. Most of this I've summed up as I've gone along the way. But I will ask at this time if you have any specific questions or if there's anything that you want me to walk through or speak to in more specificity. Before we open to that, we actually break all of these down by school. And so each school gets their own report as well to review to help inform any kind of school improvement that they're going to be doing.
Questions or comments from the board? Mr. Connor.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is ironic or not, but the numbers that called out the safety of the school were rather high. And yet one of the common complaints was more about bullying. So I think one of the things that I'd like to say, and that was part of your contrast there in the green versus yellow, I think that would be a point, because there's certainly a lot of anecdotal stories, but I would say if we're being rated high on that safety side and bullying is being called out, I would say, so in spite of that, people think it's fairly safe. that would be something for us to key in on. There's got to be something behind that. So I would say that would be a high one. And I will say there was a lot of encouraging pieces that were in there, and it looks like we're making some improvements across the board. So I would say the net promoter for the district as opposed to the schools is, you know, eye-popping difference. So that's one that we have to take seriously. But a lot of overall good things. I think the only other thing I would say is that there's clearly, as said, as you get into high school, probably your expectations, especially from the parents, is higher. But there's no doubt that there's a taking the material and making it more relatable to the students is clearly something that was called out and was in the upper 60s or lower 70s pretty consistently. So there's something to that. I'm not sure I know what that might be, but that would be something I'd be very interested to see what the teachers think of that one, is what's behind it, and you know, where could we improve it, as well as the bullying.
Mr. Connor, if I may speak to a couple of your points, just two follow-up things. Is when we take a look at the calling out of bullying within the qualitative responses, within those, we're basically asking, you know, it's a very negative skewed question. What is wrong? What can be fixed? Why are you not willing to recommend? And when we think about it from a qualitative perspective, it's just that within those number of responses, there were enough people who have brought that up to make it come across as a theme. So when we take a look here at, you know, the bullying is not tolerated at 13% disagreement, you know, that could be about 900 people. So if 900 people came across with that sort of response, that's certainly going to fall itself into a theme, even though we take a look at the other 74% who say, you know, it's still not tolerated. And I just wanted to put that in context, the idea of comparing the qualitative thematic analysis to the overall quantitative data and the context in which we receive those themes with those negatively skewed questions. The other point I wanted to just kind of follow up on is that comparison between the school and district net promoter scores. And I think we talked about this, we've talked about this with the net promoter score, where we see what's known as the proximal distal phenomenon. Basically, you know, what we see is that parents feel much more connected to the school, and they see the district through the conduit of the school. So what the literature tells us for both staff and parents, and what we actually have within our own national benchmarks, is that there tends to be a much more favorable perspective of schools than there is of the district, just because of that proximal distal piece.
Yeah, that does make sense. I will only point out that on slide 23, if you look, there's a significant amount of disagreement, and the questions are, staff members are responsive. I mean, the physically, the way the numbers here are highlighted, it's kind of weird looking there, but that did jump out to me, is that, you know, those were, you know, much lower on the high end, and it seemed, you know, the not sure's were high enough. So, I mean, I understand your points, well taken, but those kind of stood out to me.
Thank you, sir.
Questions or comments from board members? Okay, very good. Yeah, I have the same thoughts, Mike, about the bullying question. Net promoter thing. Okay, thank you, Dr. Blaylock.
Thank you, it's always a pleasure.
Okay, good work.
Thank you.
All right, anything else, Dr. Jared?
I think my report was sufficiently long.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on then to our action items for tonight. The first one is United Way of Rockford Valley for Lincoln Middle School. Is there a motion and a second to approve item 12A?
So second.
Okay. Moved by Mr. Rollins, second by Mr. Connor, I think. Are there any questions or discussion? Okay, seeing none, have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of action item 12A.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our second action item is item 12B, the resolution to regulate expense reimbursement presented by Mrs. Yark. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Second. Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll coordinate then call the roll on approval of item 12B.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is 12C, which is digital resource management, analytics, and compliance. That was presented by Mr. Barthel. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Second. Second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion?
Just,
Connor.
yeah, one quick thing. I said to them in person, but they did a really good job on this. In particular, I want to compliment the staff, everybody that worked on this to be open to suggestion, which they were on so many aspects. B, they really put a lot of work into this, including coming up with standards for criteria on this. And so I don't want to belabor it, but really good job. A lot of good thinking about how to integrate the data, how to make this easy to use. So a lot of really good work. Thank you.
Okay. We'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12C.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we'll now move on to new business, and administration is seeking suspension of the rules so restoration work can immediately begin at Lewis Lemon. So I need a motion and a second to suspend the rules.
So moved.
And
Second.
Siegel, second. Any questions or discussion on that? Now I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the motion to suspend the rules.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Excuse me. Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now who's doing Lewis Lemon? Cool. We need a motion and a second to approve item 13A, Lewis Lemon restoration.
So moved.
By Mr. Connor. Second. Second by Mr. Rollins. Discussion and presentation. Anybody doing that? Is that you, Lori?
I think we're just available for any
Okay.
for any questions at this point. But I know Mrs. Hoadley's kept everybody in the loop on the situation at Lewis Lemon, and
Okay.
I'm trying to stall for you. There, Ms. Hoadley.
Yes, I was having a fun time with the button here that wasn't working. This is actually a pass-through to the insurance carrier. Less our deductible of $2,500, but the total cost for repairing the Lewis Lemon pool after the individual set the playground on fire is around $300,000. That's to clean it and put it into order for the start of school.
So questions or comments, Ms. McCulloch?
My comment is just going to be that the student, well, we don't know if there are students. Do we? How many?
Two of
the
three
students are, two of them are ours. That's right. Something came through. I didn't read my email. But at least that the perpetrators have been apprehended, the ones who set the arsonists, shall we call them? And so we're going to follow up with those that are our students, I hope. But if nothing else, the fact that we have eyes on our schools, and so think twice, please.
Yes, we do have very good cameras, and that assisted us with identifying the individuals who lit the fire. And yes, the schools team is following up with the appropriate discipline of the students.
So thank you to our security department for having good cameras around our buildings and our playgrounds. I wanted to ask the question about will Lewis Lemon be ready to open by September 1st?
Yeah.
This is Mike Phillips.
Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
Mr. Scrivano, to answer your question, yes, the classrooms will be available for the start of school. I've been working with Gallagher Bassett. They have approved the use of overtime so we can get this work done. There are a few long lead time items that we won't have and that will continue into September, but that work will be completed at the end of the school day or on weekends.
Excuse me 1 second. I've got the battery change. Okay.
I do want to add, we were in the process of painting the interior of the school when this occurred. So the school was looking really nice. It was unfortunate that this occurred.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? I have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the restoration of Lewis Lemon.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we are now on to our second item, and the administration also asked to suspend the rules as the former vendor declared bankruptcy and the district needs a new wellness vendor for the start of the 2021 school year. So I need a motion and a second to suspend the rules.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion? Coordinator call the roll on the approval of suspending the rules.
Mr. Dixon? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
So now I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of item 13B, the Wellness Program Administrator.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Second. Second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion or presentation? Mr. Zediker.
I don't have a presentation, but just an overall summary for the board. As our previous wellness provider did file Chapter 7 bankruptcy, it left us without a wellness provider for the 2021 school year. Due to the timing and obviously due to the discussion tonight, all the things that we're focusing on and asking our staff to focus on, we thought it was prudent to keep moving with our wellness, but to reduce it just to doing a self-assessment, health assessment, and then doing our biometric screening or blood draw. That way it allows our employees to continue to track their numbers from the 36 chem panel screening that we do for our blood draws. And so that's what Empower Health, which is in front of the board tonight, would execute for us. We did ask our consultant to go to market for all of our local providers. As stated in the executive summary, the concerns from our local providers at this time was limited lab capacity due to all the COVID testing that is currently going on, as well as our large population. And then we typically have asked any of our providers to be flexible and to provide these screenings at our different locations, as well as having access to labs. So that is kind of the background. Empower Health has been, was vetted, and then ultimately is in front of the board for recommendation.
Comments or questions, Mr. Rollins?
It's my understanding that this provider will allow or offer employees the choice of having a COVID antibodies test done as part of their blood draw. Is that correct?
Yes. So in part of that package that employees can choose to pay extra for from their own cost, their own pocket, are several tests. One that was asked in the interview was the ability to do a COVID antibody, and they did confirm that that is something that the employees could pay for.
Ms. McCulloch, you have your letter?
Yeah. Did any money go out to the bankrupt I mean, we hadn't.
No, we did not make any payments to Interactive.
Approve this? Okay, so that's right. Okay.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scavano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Epperson. Or Ms.
It's actually Ms. Stepman, yes.
Okay. It's going to be formative.
Yes, I don't have a formal presentation. This is a Tier 1 PDSA, but essentially formative is replacing Performance Plus. It's a multimedia and digital assessment and reporting tool, which essentially allows our teachers to give formative assessments to students in real time and provide timely feedback. It also provides accessibility of reports and data disaggregation quickly for PLCs to be able to pivot instruction. So this is accessible both to our hybrid model and our remote learners, our in-person learners, and we can assess students in essentially the same platform no matter where they are. So I'll take any questions that you have on formative.
Ms. McCullough.
And we don't need this by the start of the school year. I guess we have one more meeting before then. Everything else being double asterisk, I wondered why this wasn't.
In terms of an on-ramp, it doesn't take long for us to just begin to use the product right away. So after our next board meeting, we're still okay for getting this in the start of the school year.
Connor.
Yeah, to be clear, this does work through ClassLink, does it not? Because you were talking about it on the reporting, but this works in conjunction with that?
Yes, ClassLink is.
I just want to be clear because we already passed that.
Yes.
And this is,
This
all we're doing is.
specific to assessment.
That's right. It's for assessments, but it's working through the superstructure that you put together.
Correct.
Okay.
So what will happen after 3 years? Get this a 3-year contract. You're going to.
Yep. Well, the field is ever changing. It's rapidly changing, especially now with remote learning being a focus for everyone. And so we'll reassess and we'll see how much advancement the product has made. One problem that we had with Performance Plus is that PowerSchool is no longer supporting updates. So it was truly a defunct product. So that'll be part of our conversation is, are we happy with how it's been going? And is the vendor keeping up with updates to make sure it's at the edge of what's new? I can give an overview, and then if you have specific questions, Mr. Holder is here as well. Actually, Mr. Holder, you've been waiting patiently. Would you prefer to introduce this topic? I apologize. Okay, go ahead. Come on up. Sorry.
I'll ask you to turn the mic on and introduce yourself.
All right, so I'm Dan Holder, one of the directors of special education. I'm here on behalf of Mike Ryan, who could not be here, as well as Jennifer Lawson, special education department. I'm not sure most people would categorize themselves, so I'm lucky to be here in front of you at 9:30ish on a Tuesday, but I do feel lucky. I feel lucky because there are certain things that we think that our staff need and would benefit from having access to. This happens to be a program that our staff have asked us for. So I think it's really nice to be here presenting something that our clinicians have asked us to provide for them. It's an evaluation system that's electronic that would allow our clinicians, again, like social workers, psychologists, speech language pathologists, to conduct assessments using an iPad one-to-one with our students. The time savings on that is tremendous. It brings us really into the 21st century. And our clinicians have been asking for this for a while. So the I think it's a huge win. The time that they would spend manually hand scoring assessments, we've heard from our clinicians, it could be 90 minutes to hand score these evaluations. We under IDEA, we have to conduct evaluations for students with disabilities or suspected of having disabilities. We conducted over 1,500 either initial or reevaluations for students last year. So that's a lot of assessments and tests to give. Whenever those protocols are outdated, we can no longer use them. The benefit of having a digital evaluation system like this is that we can, whenever there's an updated new intelligence assessment or test, because it's digital, that's updated for us automatically. We don't pay an additional cost. So I think this is that's kind of the big picture of what this is. It's a digital assessment library that has these evaluations that clinicians need to use, and it allows them to get the score results immediately. So we should see time savings. I believe this is the first. We'll be coming back.
True that the clinicians have been begging for something like this, but they were also, there was a concern because of, now we're doing one-to-one devices, but even the speech people didn't even have their own device to do these on. Will they depend on their own device, or will they depend on the student's device that this will go on?
Good question. We actually are estimating devices based on the having two per clinician. Students will use the iPad. We'll have to use one of the iPads during the testing, and then the clinician is using an iPad to administer the test.
Is that part of the cost? No, this is just the software, right? The $68,000, which seems reasonable for what we get.
Yes.
And time saving.
And the good news is, I believe, Jason, I'll let you speak to this, but I believe we already have iPads in the district that will be able to use them.
We do. We have several. We have a number of iPads to be able to distribute the number that's needed for this program without having to purchase any additional devices.
Okay. Because that has also been a problem. You know, if I could just hand the kid the iPad, if they could do this, and then we'd be done. But great, thank you.
My question was, you have conducted a pilot already, and that was very successful then?
Yes.
Okay, good. Makes sense. So what does the $68,000 cover? Is that forever? Is that for 1 year?
Yeah, I believe the quote shows that there was a unit price of $15 per student times the total number of students with disabilities. I think that's how they generate the quote.
I see.
So about 4,500 students with disabilities times $15 per student. I'm not sure. Yeah, I believe that would be an annual cost. I'm guessing that, unless there was a multi-year agreement, there's probably going to be some. I think we can usually anticipate like a 3% increase year to year on those lines. I'm not sure. If that's going to be.
Any other comments or questions? This will come back to us then on the 25th of August. Okay. Thank you. You can turn that mic off, thanks. Next is Board Policy 7.30. Mrs. Holding, are you doing that one? We gave you the trick button microphone. There you go, okay.
And actually, Mr. Zedeker is going to co-present with this one.
Okay.
This is a board policy change on the student zone policy that would allow administrators to have their students attend the same school to which they are assigned, similar to what we already have in place for the teachers. And I think there's an actual example of one. So I think that
Yes, we've had a couple of requests come through. There is one specific example of an administrator in a school, elementary school in Southwest Rockford that would like to bring her child over to that school with her from the current school. And that's not the only request we've had. Up to this point, that has not been an option for our administrators. And so we're putting that in front of the board to make that adjustment.
Mr. Elms.
Just one technical point at the end of the second sentence in the new language. It says teaches. I think that should be works because we're not talking about teachers. We're talking about administrators. And I would just like ask you to, because I haven't read it for a long time, go and look at the MOU language and make sure that we have all the same limitations as what we put in there for the similar concept that we had for teachers. For instance, I don't see anything in here, which I thought we had in the MOU, about this only applies if there's room at the school, and we don't have to create room for this to happen. So can you just kind of double check the language of the MOU and make sure we include all the same sorts of protections?
Yes, and because it's administrators, I think we use the word may, which already gives leeway, but certainly I can add the other limitations so they would know.
This is a silly question, but do you see any downside to this at all? I don't, but I just was.
No, I think this is
other than the kid who might not want to be the same.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Very true.
Okay, we'll have them follow up on that policy. Okay, this will come back to the board for a reading, second reading and approval on August 25th. I think that's the end of our new business. I just wanted to add, I have two action steps for the board. One is that if you have, board members, if you have any detailed follow-up questions on the back to school plan, you can send those questions to Dr. Jarrett, and he'll have the right person respond to the whole board on that. And then the second thing was to have, I guess it would be legal, probably checking on the policy of 7.30 to see that it's matching, what we have for the MOU with REA. Anything else for tonight's business? Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your attention and your dedication to our students. So if there are no other comments or agenda items by the board, I'll take a motion in a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Siegel, second by Mr. Connor. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 9:39.